Christian missionaries provide essential medical care and education. More than ever in these difficult times, people put their trust in religion. In the dispensary on the main barge, Knox Lilando has worked for 20 years as the supervising nurse. Today he treats a patient with first-degree burns. He has some basic medical supplies, including sterile syringes, which he says are thrown into the river after they're used, along with all other medical waste and garbage. There's a lot of malaria here, he says, a lot of diarrhea, gastroenteritis, sometimes even epidemics of cholera. It's troubling to think of cholera spreading in these crowded conditions, especially troubling when we're told there's a cholera epidemic downriver, exactly where we're headed. A call to lunch in the boat's first-class dining hall, where a few dozen privileged passengers enjoy one of the benefits of a $200 boat ticket. In its heyday, the Colonel Abea was sumptuous on the first-class deck. Starched tablecloths, polished silverware, and fine champagne, now a distant memory. But the stewards and waiters still do their best to make first class something special. Though many first-class passengers still prefer to cook their own meals outside their private cabins. Down in the kitchen for second and third class, huge pots of food are always boiling. But we hear stories about past journeys where scores of people have died after these meals, which might explain why many second and third class passengers also cook their own food. Third class on the barges is mostly do-it-yourself. Find your own space anywhere you can, make your own shelter, and if you cannot afford food from the kitchen, what you eat is up to you. On the Colonel Abea, only the elite can afford first and second class. Like most African societies today, there is virtually no middle class. Across Africa, most people's living standards have been declining for decades. The World Bank says 1 African in 3 now lives in dire poverty. There are many on board who can't afford a $15 third-class ticket, but they try to steal a ride anyway. Checking everyone on the boat and barges for tickets, security men find the usual number of stowaways. They'll be dropped off at the next port and thrown in jail for a few days, a small price to pay for some of them who wanted only a short ride downriver anyway. So did these boys, who abandoned ship while they have the chance. A suspected thief is caught by the boat's security guards, and they deal with him in the usual way. Justice is swift and severe on the Colonel Abea, and there are few crimes committed on this boat. At the top of the pyramid, the captain and his crew. None of these men earns more than a few dollars every month from his wages. But on the Colonel Abea, they're the power elite. Like President Mobutu, who is often called the helmsman of the nation, Captain Bella is the supreme authority on board, ruling with fatherly concern for those beneath him, but always on the lookout for a good deal. Everyone on the crew, from the captain to the mechanic in the engine room, will exploit his privileged position to make money, selecting the choicest items for themselves. In Zaire, you survive not on wages or salaries, but on gratuities, bribes, and black market deals. It's not how much you're paid for your job that matters, it's what you can do with it for yourself. Passing these villages brings to mind how the explorer Stanley described his adventure here. Stanley had more than 100 men in his party, well armed with rifles, but almost every day on the river he was attacked by warriors in canoes. In Stanley's words, they were savage and ferocious to an extreme degree. But to the people along this river, Stanley was a dangerous threat. They thought he was a slave trader, and they were defending their villages. Armed only with spears, bows, and arrows, they were easy sport for Stanley, like shooting fish in a barrel. As we travel downriver, there seem to be fewer villages on shore, and the rainforest appears to close in even tighter. But every mile brings more canoes, people streaming from villages on rivers and creeks we can't even see, with the shopping list of things to buy. As the sun sets, there's no stopping this commerce. For those who've waited weeks for a chance to do business here, sundown is no excuse to miss the boat. All through the night, non-stop wheeling and dealing. The Kernela is truly a city that never sleeps, with a few exceptions.
Next on Down the Dark River, the bounty of the rainforest and hedging the ravages of inflation.
Every day on this journey, the abundance of what people take from the river and forest is awesome. A bewildering variety of fish, including giant catfish that can weigh more than 250 kilograms, nearly 600 pounds. There are chimpanzees and monkeys, crocodiles, eels, and antelope, birds like parrots, and eagles. This one is destined for some witch doctor in Kinshasa. Its feet will be sold as powerful charms. The number of barnyard animals on board keeps climbing. Chickens, goats, and pigs everywhere. There are no inspectors here from the Humane Society looking out for the welfare of these animals, but neither will you find anyone looking out for the welfare of these people. No matter what you have to sell, just reaching the boat can be tricky. Traffic jams are common, and timing is critical. Too far away and you miss the boat entirely. Too close, you're swamped by the bullwhips, lose everything you have. But if you're lucky and live in a town like Bumba, the boat will stop for a few hours and the market will come to you. For those who live along the river, this floating bazaar is a lifeline. For many, their only contact with the cash economy. For a short time here, the luxuries of the big city are sold in Bumba, especially clothing, much of it second-hand from Europe and the United States. Many people in the Western world don't know it, but most of the cast-off clothing they donate to charities eventually winds up for sale in markets like this in Africa. Another sign of Africa's deepening poverty. It's now common for Africans to dress themselves in hand-me-downs from the rest of the world. Mrs. Wivine tries to sell some of her new wax prints in Bumba, but no one will pay her price. She says she'll wait until Kinshasa, where people have more cash to spend. We head back to the Kernela. As soon as we start moving downriver again, canoes swarm around the boat. Most of these people are desperate to tie alongside and spend just a few minutes on board. This is where the traders have the advantage, offering pathetically low prices for what the villagers have to sell. The villagers are pressured to accept the offers because the longer they bargain, the more time they spend on the moving boat, and the longer it will take to paddle back home upriver against the strong current. After closing a deal and collecting their money, the next step is to buy something fast. But for those who have little experience with money, how to spend it wisely can be a difficult decision. The inflation rate is not as high as it was 2 years ago, 6,000%, but the value of Zaire's money is always going down, virtually in front of your eyes. This has caused suffering everywhere in Zaire. A few years ago, soldiers rioted when Mobutu tried to pay the military with new banknotes they would not accept. This led to widespread anarchy and looting. And Zaire's economy has never recovered. Mrs. Wivine, once a journalist for 19 years, remembers.
On a pillé tout. Les bureaux.
They looted everything, she says. The offices, the machines, the paper stock, even the closets. We lost everything. Everything. That's why she's on this boat, peddling clothes and fish. Hubert Kirongogi has another story. He says he's a trained computer programmer, but he can't find a job in Zaire. While others bring their families on the boat, Hubert is away from his wife and children for weeks at a time. He says he never imagined he would live like this, his family falling apart, earning barely enough to survive. Because of inflation, he says, by the time I return home with my profits, the money I have will be worth less than when I started. It's like running around in circles. As new passengers come aboard at every stop, conditions become more crowded and squalid, the competition even more intense. Life on board the Colonel Abea is a reflection of life in Zaire, a desperate and sometimes brutal struggle for day-to-day survival. Richard Kolongaka was trained as a mechanic but now sells soap because he can't find a job. He downplays the hardships. This journey is easy, he explains. We're Africans, so it's no problem for us. It's totally different for outsiders like you. But for many of those crowded together here, this kind of degradation is the worst part of this journey. It's these living conditions, says Hubert. We sleep outside next to the animals, and they're often sick. They have viruses. Odette feels the same way. I don't like to travel like this, she says. These conditions are too difficult, especially with my baby. But we have no choice. Someday I'd like to travel up in first class. But for the vast majority of Africans, anything near first class is now only a distant dream. They've been born in the decades after independence, after the bright promise of freedom faded quickly into the shadows of tyranny and corruption. Zaire is rich in minerals and fertile soils, impoverished only by rampant exploitation and mismanagement, overseen for more than 30 years by President Mobutu, whose reputation is unsurpassed for having used his country's wealth to make himself one of the world's richest men, and whose image is everywhere. But even in the wreckage of this nation, some still have their dreams. Every evening, Jacob Mumbambi runs laps to keep in shape. He told us he won third place in Zaire's national championships last year, but he says Zaire doesn't support its athletes, and he has no sponsor. He took the boat last month to Kisangani, hoping to find a way east to Kenya, where he says athletes are appreciated. But for Jacob, Kisangani was a dead end. Now he's on his way back to Kinshasa, still nurturing his dream of running in the Olympics. Like so many others here, running in circles, going nowhere. Halfway to Kinshasa, we pass another boat pushing a barge, a private operator, not nearly as big as us. We'll see several like this on the journey, a sign that competition from private operators is increasing.